Hello and welcome to the weekly podcast from the Huff Hines Institute for Sports Medicine and Human Performance. I'm your host, Dr. Tim Lightfoot, and I'm so glad that you took the time to download us and that you're with us. We hope that you're all staying active and healthy during this time of the pandemic and safe during that same time as well. As a reminder, as we've been saying on our front page, on our homepage of the website at huffhinesinstitute.org, we have the tips from both the American College of Sports Medicine and the World Health Organization about exercising during the time of pandemic. They're on the front page. As a matter of fact, we've got a little link right here that you can add in and put into your browser, and that'll take you right to the American College of Sports Medicine guidelines. So look those up and stay active and healthy. We've been doing our podcast sheltering in place like all of us have, and so we've been learning Zoom and a variety of other technologies. So we all know that our audio and our video technology is not quite what we are used to, but hang with us. We're getting better at that, and hopefully our quality will come back to where we're used to. We always bring in interesting persons in the world of sports medicine and human performance, and I think today is no exception. We're really excited to have with us Army Lieutenant Colonel Andy Riise. Welcome to the podcast today, Andy.
Howdy, Tim. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Super. We're glad to have you coming to us from Georgia. As a matter of fact, we're going to, I'm going to tell them a little bit about you, and then we'll just kick right on into the podcast. Lieutenant Colonel Riise is soon to be retired from the U.S. Army, as we mentioned a while ago. He is currently serving as a mental performance coach for the Colorado Rockies Major League Baseball team, and we're so fortunate he's actually going to be assuming a position with the Texas A&M Coaching Academy here at Texas A&M very shortly, as soon as he can get to Texas, I believe. And he's going to be our program developer and the program manager of a new initiative that we have going on in the Coaching Academy called the Veterans to Coaching Initiative, which we're going to talk a little bit about as we go through the podcast. Over his 20-year career, he served in a variety of leadership and faculty positions in the Army, highlighted by multiple combat tours overseas, 5 years with 2 special forces units, and teaches and has taught psychology and leadership at West Point and the Air Force Academy. Maybe most importantly, he is a co-author and editor of the book Deliberate Discomfort: How U.S. Special Operations Forces Overcome Fear and Dare to Win by Getting Comfortable Being Uncomfortable. And there should be a little thumbnail of that book that pops up on the screen right now for folks to see it. I would encourage you to go out and order it. It has an interesting theme, Andy, and that's where I want us to jump into. Its primary theme is that to learn and to grow, you have to be uncomfortable. You have to be in a place of discomfort. And that seems to be resonating right now with all of us. We're all a little bit uncomfortable. What should we be learning? How should we be developing?
Yeah, it's as Carol Dweck, famous researcher and professor at Stanford University, has talked about. Growth is really the prerequisite is getting outside of your comfort zone. And the idea and the premise behind this book, is the title suggests, is that if you lead into that, if you seek that discomfort and you perceive that as an opportunity for you to be able to learn, fail, and then grow as a result of that experience, whether or not it's, no matter what happens, you're good, bad, or indifferent, you're going to get better. And not only are you going to get better, but other people around you are going to get better.
So interesting enough, it's interesting you say this, is that I have met some people who are looking at this pandemic and the shelter-in-place orders that most of us are under as an opportunity to grow and get better. I know one person who's learning a foreign language. As I was mentioning a while ago, matter of fact, the producer on the podcast had decided he's going to learn how to cut hair and play the piano during his time. Is that kind of what you're thinking about when we talk about deliberate discomfort, maybe being an avenue for growth?
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime when, bad things happen that are beyond your control, I think you have a choice to see that as, either a threat or as an opportunity. And so I think a lot of that comes from the psychological principle having to do with selective perception or mental filtering. And so I think we understand what we control and what we can't control. And if we can't control the pandemic and what's going to happen next and how that's going to affect us, what we can always control is how we think, our attitude, which is our choice, and then how we behave, how we act and react. And so to that end, as those examples, of course, no one wants to go seek being affected by this And we don't want to see people die. We don't want to see the economic impact. Nobody seeks to have that type of catastrophic failure happen to you. But if that's not happening, and you're in this situation to where you're forced to be at home within your four walls, you're forced to be around your family members, or either by yourself, what can you control in terms of how you think and how you act and react to then improve yourself? Whether it's, like you said, learning something new, focusing on your family, spending quality time, reading that book you didn't do. It really and really putting things in perspective that strips away all the things that may have been ancillary distractions. Adversity and challenge like this really has a way of really distilling down the priorities as far as what really matters and what's worthy of your precious time and energy, because how precious life is. So I hope that answers your question, Tim.
Well, I think so. And I think one of the things that people are battling so much, and one of the things we talked about on last week's podcast, was trying to stay positive, because people wind up watching TV and listening to the news, and it seems to be one bit of bad news after another. And so they have a hard time focusing on what you just said, and that is, to a large extent, we can't control all that. So
Right.
we have to focus on what we can control, which is part of it is our mental state.
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, it's I just posted about this recently. We ultimately are what we think about the most, right? And science kind of suggests that this is true in terms of how it impacts your performance, how you execute tasks at the upper range of your potential consistently, regardless of what happens circumstance-wise, right? So if you think about, the point of entry is how I think. Ultimately, that affects your emotions, about how you feel. Ultimately affects your physiology, which all too well from your expertise, and that affects your behavior, which ultimately turns into this either flywheel, what we call psychological momentum, or this doom loop. But really, the points of entry, what you can control, are those toggles of the attitude and the behaviors, right? And so if we choose to fixate on the doom and gloom and the news of the day, and we're getting sucked into the cycle of the newsfeed about what the numbers are and and all the negative news stories are, it's very easy to get wrapped up into that and get caught in that doom loop. However, I think if you can limit, the pointed information that you need to get, and then choose to see maybe the good stories and what the opportunities are, despite what the reality is, and that's the Stockdale paradox associated with that. Then you can start to then use that flywheel on your to help get more out of what you got and be at your best when it matters the most.
That's why we tell everybody the only news they should listen to is the Health Lines podcast.
That's right. Yeah. There you go. Easy day.
We're trying to be positive about everything and it help people understand what they can and can't do.
Right.
Let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about the initiative that you're starting here, and that's that Veterans to Coaching initiative. Help people understand why that's a good idea and why you're pursuing this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, thank you for helping co-found and give the Coaching Academy legs. It's just such an amazing program. I'm so thankful that I found you guys and to be part of your family. It's just an amazing opportunity, especially as I transition. But a lot of people don't think of folks in the military as coaches, right? But really, coaching is really the application of the art and science of leadership. It just within the athletic arena. So when I think of myself, veterans like myself and others who have gone through the crucible of combat, leading men and women into battle, training them on new skills, this diverse population, on things they've never learned before, applying it under high stakes situations, competing, developing physically, mentally, socially. All those things make veterans a great potential coaches. In fact, they are coaches. A lot of them just don't know it. And considering the shortage that we have with athletic coaches in the state of Texas and across the country, we're bleeding coaches. And you look how important they are in the development of young people. I think veterans is a critical role in filling that gap to help give back to our young athletes and develop our communities and continue to serve, because a lot of veterans want to continue to serve. So what better way than to do that and help veterans train, educate, and certify to become athletic coaches, teachers, and administrators? To me, it just makes a ton of sense, and I applaud you and shout out to Dr. Thornton for your vision in doing that. And in Texas A&M, what a proud tradition of developing young military leaders, taking care of veterans and their families. And I can't think of a better marriage to make this happen. I'm just excited to be a part of it.
Well, and I have to give you a shout out for the insignia behind you, your shoulder there. Excellent. Yeah, we haven't got you hooked up with a swag yet, so we like that. So
That's right.
a little more shout out for the program. How would a veteran that heard about this program, how would he go about contacting you or the coaching academy to actually maybe investigate it? If this is something they may want to do.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because there's been a lot of interest in that, and we've been talking about that here at the Soldier for Life Transition Assistance Program here at Fort Benning, where we're researching the benefit of this. But the best way to do it, if you're interested in this, first of all, is to go to our new website, which is going to come out on May 1st. So I highly encourage everybody to go just Google search Texas A&M Coaching Academy, which I know we'll have a link to that. If you want to find me specifically, and again, this is a program that's in concept, right? So we are building this thing. We're not building it in mid-flight. We're going to do it right before it takes off the ground. So you can reach out to me and ask me questions. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm also on Instagram and I'm on Twitter. Please do a direct message to me. It's Andy Riise, and it's a very unusual name, so you're gonna find me, and I'm usually pretty responsive. So please, if you're a veteran, you're interested in this, or if a veteran spouse is interested in this as well too, because what we found in our market research so far is that the dependents of veterans are an underserved population, right? And we want to take care of those people who've also served along with their service members.
It strikes me that I'm not sure that people realize that there is an issue with veterans going back into the workforce when they leave the military, and
Yeah.
the program that you mentioned there at Fort Benning as well. Would you talk a little bit about that? Talk about that problem, because I saw that with my own brother who left the military and really had a difficult time finding a job.
No, absolutely. It's a huge issue. There's a lot of, we call it the sea of goodwill, and I feel proud to be part of a generation where the Vietnam generation of my father and my father-in-law didn't have such overwhelming support by our country, let alone business leaders who want to hire veterans. They see the real and perceived value. But still, there's a lot of veterans who find themselves transitioning after a career of service, like me. This is all I've ever known as an adult, and it's a big pivot and a transition. All transitions are important, but coming out of especially I've spent my whole career at war, and to transition into the civilian workforce, is a difficult one. So how do we better prepare not only the service members but also the potential employers to be able to then optimize and find the right fit? And I think that what we're doing is we're creating so to give you some statistics, there's over 120,000 veterans actually transition out of the military, all branches of service, every single year, right? And I think within the first 2 years, the Veterans Administration says that 80% of them change jobs again. Now, think about the cost associated with that, both monetarily on both the veteran and their family and the employer, and not only mention the other intrinsic costs associated with it in terms of stress, time, the things that are lost to that, and all the energy that is wasted in that pivot. If we could create a marriage or an opportunity to veterans go to a profession that meets their passion and their purpose and meets the need of whoever the employer is, it's gonna, it just creates more efficiency and effectiveness for everyone. And so I think that we are a big part of that solution, because there's only one other veteran service organization called Soldiers of Sidelines that does what we're going to do at the Texas A&M Coaching Academy.
Oh, and that's really cool. And what's interesting is that people don't often think of veterans as coaches, but there are several. I mean, your book is a good example of it, where people have worked to bring the leadership lessons from the military to public life, to corporate life, and so forth.
Right.
And so tell us a little bit more about your book. We kind of started off about the main theme, and we really didn't develop what the book is about, but it really does play along this line of coaching and how life goes.
It does. It's funny. And I joke around that, I lived in these both worlds of sports. I grew up, I played college football at Army. I love sports. I stayed in the Army because I consider it the ultimate team sport. And as I've lived in both of these worlds the last 10 years, you go to coaches' offices and they have a lot of military leader books. And you go to a lot of military leaders' offices, they have a lot of coaching books. And the reason why is because of that transferability of not only knowledge and skills of experience, but how you develop people and teams that got to perform at a high level. And so when you consider the art and science of that, there's a lot of best practices and that are evidence-based that need to be shared. And that cross-pollination between those two worlds, I think, needs to merge more. I feel like at the Coaching Academy, we provide that synergy. We provide that connective tissue. I think, me coming in and just our connection at A&M with the core and everything else is fantastic. And there are other examples out there as well that do that. But I think, specifically what we wanted to do is we wanted to tell these stories of these incredible combat veterans, their trials and tribulations, their real stories, which is really the art. And we wanted to then build a bridge to the science, to the behavioral science that's applicable and relevant and responsive and resourceful for the user to really then become a playbook of how that applies to them, and whether it's in business, it's in their life, and it's in other multiple arenas, whether it's business, it's in the public sector, health, whatever that is. The idea is to have these transferable skills that make people and teams better at what they do. So that's our goal in the book.
And there's an interesting layout for the book. As I've read the book, what's interesting, each chapter focuses on a special forces operative, and then they tell a story about something they went through or they dealt with, and then it switches over to the science side and how what that person went through from a scientific perspective can help build leadership. And then at the end of each chapter comes back to these kind of leadership guidelines. And that's a very interesting way to put together a book.
Yeah, it was an amazing process. And I mean, first of all, I'm humbled, just to be with this group of people. I mean, both on our veterans and their amazing stories. I mean, 2 Medal of Honor winners. I call them all real life action heroes. And, some of the most humble, gracious people you've ever met in your life. And then some really world-class behavioral science practitioners, who are teaching, who are working with business leaders, who are working with military folks, elite athletes, who really understand, how to then build that bridge and translate, what this veteran's talking about that some people just can't relate to. A lot of people can't relate to going to Iraq and Afghanistan and getting shot up and blown up, let alone losing a friend, let alone the trauma associated with reliving that. It's very unrealistic for people. And I think what we're trying to also do is debunk a lot of the myths associated with that, understanding that, hey, the stakes are different. In your world in sports, your life's not on the line when you're performing, but your livelihood may be on the line, right? And then the stakes are relative to your situation. So how can I distill that down in ways that are palatable and I can then apply in real time, And so that's really going from the so what to the now what, and then the how to, if that makes sense. So it follows that theme throughout the book, and to me, it becomes more of a manual than it becomes a story, very honestly.
Right. Well, it's interesting, especially in the chapter that you worked on, that you contributed. You talked about the difference between belief and trust, and how leaders need both and need to show both. And it seems that today we may have a lack of trust in society in general, as well as a lack of belief. So can you tell the audience a little bit about those ideas that you've got and that you kind of were able to develop in that piece?
Yeah, it's a great point. I hadn't thought about how trust is being tested right now in a world, especially as we look to reintegrate. With the president talking about rolling out the phase plan and how that's that's a really poignant topic right now. And trust, is a really interesting topic. I talk about the psychology of trust. I've taught it the last 2 years here at the Maneuver Center of Excellence at Fort Benning to junior leaders. And I talk about it in terms of being the currency of optimal individual and team performance. And notice I say currency because it starts with investing in yourself, right? So you really have to develop what we call self-efficacy, which I know you're familiar with, but our audience members may not, which is your inner belief in yourself, no matter what happens. It's related to the aspects of confidence, but really you have to build trust from the inside out. And I talk about this idea of training yourself to trust yourself. And, and that's related going back to what are the ways that I think, what do I say to myself, and how do I reinforce the affirmations? How do I seek challenges and opportunities that we talked about before too? And then how do I reinforce that, no matter what happens to me on a daily basis, to develop those habits that allow you to become unconsciously competent at trusting yourself. And then beyond that, is beyond The intrapersonal side is the interpersonal aspect of trust, which is the way we think about it. And a lot of the research from that comes from Dr. Paul Zak, which I recommend your readers go check out. It's called The Trust Factor. And he goes down to the neurological cellular level of how trust works in terms of the neurotransmitters like oxytocin being released and what promotes that, neurochemical release within yourself amongst other people. What are the conditions and the things that you do as far as how you communicate, how you act and treat each other with empathy and care, compassion, in ways that promote trust, no matter what happens. And I think what people are going to really walk away, have to really understand, if you think about one thing when it comes to trust, is that you have to take that leap of faith, and that you have to be willing to give trust, even when someone hasn't demonstrated artifacts or evidence that suggests they should trust you. And that's going to be tested, very much so too, because the normal that we knew it before coronavirus is going to change. It's a new world, and our trust in others and whether or not they are asymptomatic, and what does social distancing look like? Because everyone is going to have a whole different perception about what it means to get back to social proximity to each other. So it's imperative that we train ourselves to trust ourselves, and we continue to invest in trust in others, even when we have reason not to. That's really getting comfortable with trust.
I mean, just going to the grocery store and taking a shopping cart from someone. I was thinking about that. I would never now pull shopping carts in from the parking lot, which I would regularly do before.
Yeah.
Now you won't, because maybe they're not sanitized, maybe they're not sterilized, whatever. And
That's
so
right.
those are the small pieces of trust that I find catching myself going, wait a minute, this is what's really changed.
That's right. Think about just shaking someone's hand.
Yeah.
I mean, human beings have been shaking hands, for thousands of years, right? As a way of showing friendship and greeting each other. And I had a friend that remarked to me that he shook 3 hands for the first time. How many times have you counted how many hands you've shaken in one day, just being being a professor at A&M? So that whole simple gesture has, and the way that we think about that is all going to change.
Mm-hmm. So this has been a fascinating conversation, Andy. I think we're running a little bit low on time here. We're going to have you back on a little bit later when you're actually embedded here at Texas A&M, in Georgia. And so we'll continue this conversation. But if folks are going to remember one thing from this podcast, we always give our guests an opportunity to take home message. And what would your take home message be? What should they remember from this podcast?
Yeah, I think take this opportunity right now in your life to find one thing that you want to get better at that makes you uncomfortable, right? And to really put things in perspective as far as what that one thing is, and go after that and attack it. Attack it with everything that you have right now too, because you can control that thing. And if you get better at that 1% every single day, you're going to come out of the situation a much better person and leader, athlete, coach, husband, father than you were before this too. So that's my challenge to everyone in the audience. And again, I'd love to hear from you as far as what is that one thing and how's that working for you?
Excellent. We'll have people take you up on that. So take him up on it. Let him know what you're working on as you're inside in the pandemic. And Andy, I want to tell you, thank you so much for being with us. Good luck on the move when they let you out of Georgia.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it, Tim. Thanks. This has been an honor to be on the podcast. And, since I'm a new Aggie, is it okay if I give you a gig 'em?
That's a good thing. Absolutely.
All right, man. Awesome. Giddy up. Thanks.
And we'll give that big gig 'em out to everybody else that's watching online. Thank you again for taking the time to be with us. Again, we'll remind you, if you want guidelines for how to exercise during the pandemic, just check out the little link that's right down here in the bottom of the screen. And hopefully you can find all the information there you need, or some of the previous podcasts we've had about being active and healthy during the pandemic. So until the next time we join you, we remind you again, cough into your elbow, wash your hands. Yeah, wash your hands, practice social distancing, and stay active. Don't stay in the house. Go be active outside. That's still allowable. And until then, we want you to be active and safe.